My name is Bergur Finnbogason. People call me Bergur, like hamburgers. And I'm the creative director of EVE Online. For those of you who don't know what EVE Online is a massively multiplayer online game set in the universe of New Eden, 21,000 years in the future. It was initially published in 2003 by an Icelandic studio called CCP Games, a studio founded in 1997. So we're getting quite old in the gaming industry, and we just celebrated our 20th anniversary last year of the game. So EVE Online is, like I said earlier, it's a single-shard, massively multiplayer online game where hundreds of thousands of players fight over power, wealth, and fame in New Eden. In EVE, players decide their own fate and create their own stories. It's a game about collaboration. It's a game about working together towards massive, unbelievable projects and goals. So the game is a lot about building strong social constructs, and that is our kind of key retention driver. It is what we call a sandbox game, where we basically give players the tools to build their own sandcastles, and then, of course, for all the players to ruin those sandcastles, like proper schoolyard tactics. The game loop is relatively simple. You gather resources to build better equipment, to get better territory, so you can get better resources. But then we build shortcuts to this core loop that allow people to sidestep steps of this journey, and actually, to create specialization. These are things like the market. So instead of gathering resources, you can just buy resources. And then we also build a lot of grouping mechanics that create very strong friendships and community. And these can lead to epic battles, epic wars, where people are fighting over territories. This is one of our more famous wars called BTAC-R, happened just over 10 years ago, where thousands of people were shooting each other in the face. And every single ship here is built by a player. Every single bullet shot here is built by a player. And these are basically, people fighting over territory. And these can lead to very interesting news articles around the world, where people talk about virtual wars costing $300,000, and you have politicians in the US freaking out that a space war is happening and they don't have space police. But as a company, this is kind of our core mission, is to create virtual worlds more meaningful than real life. And this does not mean that we're trying to kind of replace you. We're not trying to unplug you from this reality and put you into another reality. This is more saying that we take inspiration from this side of reality, and we apply that to the extension of reality that EVE Online is. And that's why, we believe in these social constructs. We believe in building communities and building strong foundations. All with the ultimate goal of having EVE last forever. So that's a very short introduction of who I am. Try to beat that, Attila. I will have a talk tomorrow that goes more into depth of EVE Online and the creation of EVE Online. So make sure to not get too drunk tonight, and show up to my talk at 11. But more about me later.
So, some 10 years ago, when I sent my very first email to Bergur, I probably know only a fraction of all the things that he just talked about. I was one of those players who installed EVE, played with it a day, found it amazing, and also too overwhelming, and I said, I don't have that time for now in my life, and so I stopped playing with it. But I always say that EVE is probably one of the most interesting and most special beasts in the gaming industry. So it's the game that you know about, that you read about. And so even that somewhat superficial knowledge proved to be really useful when I wrote this email to Bergur. I'm probably one of the oldest in this room, but I already coming from a generation who grew up with video games. This was my first next-gen console. And it was it's not only that it was fascinating to see in the last decades to see where games got to, but it also became clear that gradually games became so much more than games. And this is kind of a recurring topic of today's talk. Now, the other thing that fascinated me ever since I got to know about its existence is citizen science, which is the involvement of everybody in the scientific process. And I found it fascinating that, as a non-scientist, I can contribute to scientific progress. Citizen science can have many different forms, from, being out in the field photographing insects or plants or birds, or taking soil samples or water samples from rivers, all the way up to analyzing big existing data sets with our superior pattern recognition capabilities as human beings. So just to give you an example, this is something that probably most of you know, Foldit, which is a protein folding game where we have, as humans, a very good intuition of how to pack these molecules in a way that then the computers calculate an energy level for. So these two topics really fascinated me, and then we came up with an idea, because I also knew that citizen science was struggling with engagement and getting people interested in the first place, and then keeping them to contribute to these scientific projects. And so we came up with an idea of how to resolve it. And the idea was to team up with game companies and taking these small citizen science micro tasks and putting them into existing AAA games, so that they become part of the game, they become part of the narrative, they're connected visually and through the reward system. And so we thought that if you can team up with the gaming companies and use their decades-long experience of how to make something which is really engaging and fun, and also if we get access to the already existing player communities of millions or sometimes tens of millions, then probably we have a good chance to resolve this engagement problem in citizen science.
All right, so like Attila said, we actually got to know each other from a mutual friend years and years and years ago, but that's a two-beer story for tonight. But product discovery and EVE Online, why in the world would we ever do something like this? It is extremely daunting and scary to take third-party content and insert it into your game, and it's something that most people stray away from, because you need to build this thing called trust with the people that are providing you content, and it's a very scary and daunting task, and most actually stray away from it. But like I said before, I'm from Iceland, and Iceland is a tiny rock in the North Atlantic. It's a rock that's constantly trying to kill you, so we don't have the ability to think things properly through. So when we heard about this project, we thought it was awesome, and the first reason was science. EVE Online is a sci-fi game. We're all science buffs. I'm a huge science buff, so it just made sense, and it felt quite natural. For me, this is kind of my first taste of citizen science. This is SETI at home. Back in probably like 1999, me and my best friend would sit by his Pentium or 486 or Pentium machine, connected to the internet, running SETI at home, looking for aliens while playing XCOM and preparing ourselves for alien invasion, as you do. Luckily, I did not have to pay the phone bills, but we would run this like 24/7, 307 hours of gameplay. The second reason why we thought this was interesting is that it is a very interesting game design challenge to fold in citizen science and real scientific tasks into an existing game. It's also a really unique opportunity to be a part of something way bigger than just kind of the universe that you have created. And that's kind of the last. We believe that this is the first step towards something way bigger, kind of linking these two things together. But integrating science, there's a lot of unknowns here. Everything from tech issues to extremely complex legal issues, and how in the world we're actually going to design this and build this together. So to kind of set ourselves up for this journey, we set ourselves kind of We put down kind of 4 guiding principles to guide us in this journey. So the first one, the scientific data that we wanted to take a look at had to have a real-world purpose of altruistic nature. So we did not, like, we wanted this to be data that had real-world impact, something that would change the world, and we did not want to, we did not want to find bomb targets or do something that would harm humanity. So bomb targets, no. Curing cancer, oh yeah. Second, it had to be aesthetically fitting and thematically adaptable to fit the EVE universe. So as a game developer, we owe it to our players that we never break immersion. Like the second you come into the game, like the contract between me and the player is that they get to step into this extension of their reality that the game is. So we did not want to, you don't want to be looking for zebras or giraffes or whatever, because there are no zebras in New Eden, or at least not that I know of. It's 7,700 systems, so maybe there are giraffes on some random planets. Yeah, the tasks must take a consistent length of time to solve. This is an interesting point. So once you enter a game or enter product discovery, we have to, like, as a player, you have to understand what the commitment is. Is it a 30-second commitment? Is it a 2-minute commitment? Is it a 10-minute commitment? Because if it's inconsistent, like, it's just daunting. It's similar to like the whole Netflix idea of like, watching a movie is way too long, but somehow you end up watching like 6 shows, which is way longer than a movie. But you come in and you understand the commitment that you're going into. And then the research needs to require high volume of tasks. This is a huge one, and we will actually get to this one. We ran into a problem with this one that I'll cover a little bit later. EVE players are very eager, so yeah, we need a critical mass of data to consume. So, for the first project, we wanted to work with a relatively contained data set. Both to test if we could make a fun and engaging game, but also to test if this was even possible, like from a logistic point of view, whether that was technical or legal. And then that's when these little cute guys came into play. Just to touch a bit on what people maybe might not realize, or at least we didn't realize when we started this project, being a game developer, like, things move fast. And we like to kind of sometimes shoot from the hip and not kind of think things through properly, and production might be a little iffy, and there are some bugs and stuff like that. That does not work with universities. Universities are like, they need to double check and triple check. Everything takes like a year, is quick, and the amount of like legality around ownership of data is insane. So that's some of the things that we the foundational work that we had to do and took way longer. But the initial project we looked at something called a subcellular protein atlas from the Human Protein Atlas in Sweden. On the technical and the legal side, because of the ownership of data, oh, this is really bright. So basically, EVE Online sits here and MMOS sits over there. And in EVE Online, we really don't know what you're looking at. We just create a kind of a render view from to the bridge that MMOS is. And MMOS basically acts as the bridge between the universities or the research institutes and EVE Online. So in theory, we don't know what you're looking at. Of course, we know, but we don't know exactly which data image. And that's 8 pages of legal documents that I'm citing here. But yeah, so this first data set is we're helping the Human Protein Atlas in Sweden, mapping out the subcellular protein atlas. And thematically in game, the science faction, Sisters of EVE, are researching tissue samples found to find out more about the mysterious drifters in the game. So drifters are a big common enemy in EVE Online. The Sisters of EVE and their project lead, Professor Lundberg, call upon capsuleers of New Eden to take part in solving the scientific challenge through the project discovery interface. And Professor Lundberg is actually based off Emma Lundberg, who led up the Human Protein Atlas in Sweden. So we have a real-world scientist in-game, which is, I think, the first. And the idea here is basically we're taking these proteins, and they had to be categorized. And at that time, when this project started, this was taking up insane amount of usually postdoc time, where people were looking at these cell images and figuring out, categorizing them. So they didn't have any algorithm to solve it properly. So they needed human input. And this is where citizen science comes in super, super interestingly. So citizen science is all about trying to get a consensus. So you show the same data set to hundreds of people, and if you get X amount of people saying the same thing, we can kind of trust that is the correct answer, or the most correct answer. But of course, it's easy because we're trusting people, like we were talking about earlier. So when everyone does the same mistake, that mistake becomes the whole truth. So we had an issue very early on where the EVE community figured out this issue. So on social media, especially Reddit, EVE players started spamming that you should just categorize everything as cytoplasm. So everything became cytoplasm, which was an interesting challenge to do. So we actually had to rethink our reward mechanism very quickly and move away from awarding equally to each submission, and actually start to add in randomized gold standard questions. So basically questions that would give you an accuracy rating. So we like to develop our game with the community, and we're fine with things breaking a bit, and what's the worst that can happen? You fix it. But this wasn't actually our biggest problem. Our biggest problem was that we have a very, very, very eager community. The subcellular protein atlas was around 250,000 samples, and you needed to get consensus. You need everywhere, like at minimum 5. You need to serve each data point at least 5 times to a person, but I think it went up to 200 or 300 times where each data sample was shown to a person. And we our preliminary calculation gave us around 2 to 3 months for the data set to reach full consensus. But our awesome players managed to solve the whole data set in 3 weeks, which is pretty amazing. And we calculated that this would, we saved around 250 years of a postdoc student's life of work, which was quite good. By the end of this project, we actually reached consensus on the whole data set 7 times. And this actually became extremely important because with all this data, with all this categorization data, the scientists managed to take, the whole data set, feed it into a learning algorithm, and now what used to be a manual thing for postdoc students is now an automated process done by AI, built on our data set of these awesome peeps here that do science during day and party during night, because EVE players are awesome. But this also led us to adding a 5th rule to our little rule set, which was tasks need to lean to challenging and difficult over quick and easy. We didn't want to dumb down we had already established this is a fairly complicated and kind of challenging task, and we didn't want to dumb down the already community that we've built. So we ended up adding this as an important rule. The next project we did was a bit close to home. So we worked with the University of Geneva to find exoplanets. So exoplanets are planets that orbit around stars or suns. Like every star you see in the sky is a sun. So, and a lot of them have exoplanets. And for this project, we worked with University of Geneva, and we worked with the awesome Michel Mayer, who later got a Nobel Prize for finding the first exoplanet, and something more complicated and fancy, but yeah. But thematically, in world, there was a lot of controversy around Sisters of Eve, releasing this data to the public. So the in-game police Concord actually took over the project and kind of put Sisters of Eve into the bad corner. For the project, we actually got data from the Corot telescope, looking at data really far away. The project is from a scientific point of view, it's a bit complicated, but it's really cool. So basically what we're looking at is we're looking at data. So these telescopes look at a star, and they take images of stars every few minutes. And then, if a planet passes in front of the star, you actually get a dip in a light curve. And that is the first detection of there might be an exoplanet there. But actually, when the planet goes behind the star, you also get a different type of a dip. And if this happens on a even interval, there is probably an exoplanet here. And let's see if this video wants to. Yeah. So what you're presented with, like I said, you're presented with a light curve from a faraway star. And here you can see like a graph like players see it, and this is around a 30-day graph. And players are basically asked to kind of try to find a transit. And as you can see, this is quite difficult to understand, and I never really got super good at it. But what you can do is you can zoom in, zoom out, you can fold the graph together, and you can really start to find these kind of these beautiful transits. You can also simplify the graph and really start to, as you can see here, so now this person is finding a graph. And as you think you have found something, you submit your findings, the data is analyzed, and then you get rewarded with rewards. Pretty cool. But the really interesting challenge here is that there are very few stars with exoplanets in the universe. So we're kind of, I think this data, they said these were around 200,000 stars we were looking at. And they thought we could find, 9 ± 3 exoplanets. So you're basically creating a game about finding nothing, and it's a needle in a haystack kind of a game. So that became a very interesting challenge to design around. And oftentimes, players had to, they would spend hours and debate massively on if there is something there or not. The problem with exoplanets is that, once you find something, you actually need to point a telescope to that star for a very, very, very long time to submit. So we don't really have any proper findings that we can share because we're still analyzing the things that we found. Then for the third product discovery project we did, we actually worked with Dr. Andrea Cosarizza, who is a professor of immunity at the University of Modena in Italy. And this project came about at the start of COVID. We felt that, we had this pandemic hitting, no one knew anything, and we were hoping that we could maybe help with what in the world was going on. So Attila managed to get us in contact with the University of McGill University and the University of Modena in northern Italy, which was a hotbed of COVID right at the beginning. And Andrea actually, who you can see here in the center, he actually moved part of his lab from the university into his garage. So we're getting live data from his garage where he was doing flow cytometry, which is a word I have a hard time saying. So basically, we were looking at the effect that first COVID had on the immune system, and then second, how the antibodies dealt with how the antibodies affected the immune system as well. So the data that we're getting, like I said, is from something called a flow cytometer, which is a super cool machine that shoots lasers through cells, and you get very interesting data coming out of it. It's very deep and hardcore science, so we made some cool UI, sci-fi UI for players to try to understand a bit better. The scientists love this, so they have been actually using this as to present kind of how this actually works. It works like this, super cool. But in game, what you're presented with in game is this is the data that you get, and as a player, you need to mark out kind of hot zones in the data we're getting. So we mark this data, we press submit, and you get feedback back on how your submission kind of worked with others. We give you accuracy rating, and then what happens next is that the algorithm behind the scene actually goes in and zooms in the data, and you get kind of, so this becomes kind of recursive data that you're looking at. Yeah, so this is pretty old numbers, but we've gotten close to, I think we're around 100 million submissions in product discovery altogether. Do you remember the actual number? Yeah, I think it's over 100 million submissions that we've gotten from players. We've had around 218,000, or I think it's closer to 250,000 players that have played the game quite actively since the launch. That's not talking about like all the like just small players, but yeah, this has definitely had a huge impact on the game and the world. And similar to the first project, the incredible amount of submissions in this data set here has actually allowed the scientists to automate this process as well. So what used to be a very tedious process for master's students, doctorate students, and postdocs is now somewhat automated. And this process is actually used to in a lot of other research, like cancer research. So that's kind of what we're looking at now. Attila, do you want to?
Yeah, we're a bit behind schedule, but I want to tell you a couple of stories about what is the impact of this project. So Bergur mentioned the first project with the Human Protein Atlas with these beautiful images. Immediately, the player community embraced the project, like crunching through the data set in 3 weeks. But what tells a lot about how successful it was is that EVE created some special rewards for the game. This was the Sisters of EVE combat suit. This was the ultimate reward. And of course, game designers made some estimation of how much time it will take for the most active players to unlock it. And they were calculating with something like 3 to 4 weeks. The first one was handed out in 17 hours after launch, and the second one 6 minutes later. So that was kind of the activity. And that's where we knew and had proof that this is going to work as a powerhouse for science. This was the first peer-reviewed publication of the project. Nature Biotechnology is one of the most prestigious scientific journals. And it's not only that they accepted the paper, but they put it on the front page of the magazine. Nature is not too keen on publishing fake science, but they thought that this is just too important, so they let EVE spaceships flying over the cover of Nature Biotechnology. Another nice story, I didn't know about that. Bergur told me this morning that the guy who was the PhD student who was the main author of the article, Devin Sullivan, who is on the left, he had a wager with one of his friends at university who gets to publish the first scientific article that makes it on the front page of a journal. And so the other one had to make a tattoo on themselves, and that happened. Also, it was an amazing opportunity for doing different activities with the community. So this was at the FanFest, where we made the first ever live citizen science tournament. And there you see Hilmar, who is the CEO of EVE, the research team, and I think two of the best players who won the competition.
Attila, don't it's the first world championship of citizen science esport.
What did I say?
Oh, just first competition. World championship.
World championship, yeah. So, the Exoplanet project. This is Michel Mayer in real life. He came to FanFest. I think the fact that a Nobel laureate researcher comes to a gaming convention, gives the talks, and mingles with players tells a lot about how substantial the contribution is. This photo was in Ars Technica. I love it a lot. The guy on the left is the Space Pope. He always cosplays as the religious leader at FanFest. In real life, he is a senior education officer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, if I'm not mistaken. So this tells a lot about the different facets of the project. Michel Mayer gave a talk at FanFest, and you can read some of the comments under his YouTube video. This is the kind of response that researchers dream of when they're doing science communication. I don't know what this is. Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry, this is animated. So one of the things that was we sort of expected, but it exceeded all our expectations in how positive the media coverage was about project Discovery. So we got articles in many major journals. Also, we got some really nice awards. And this is, I always say that this is, of course, good for us, good for CCP, good for EVE Online. But in general, I believe that this is good for the whole gaming or game industry, because we still combat that negative perception of video games, and it's important that we can show the broader audience that games can contribute to the greater good. Third project, Project Discovery Flow Cytometry. Here I want to show you a video which was a BBC short interview. I love this especially because they managed to make an interview with a player, and he tells about why they're doing it. So it tells about a lot of the empowerment and motivation behind why contributors are participating.
Like, you look at a plot and you just draw polygons around data. You can just sit there, pull it up and start doing it. And I think that was exciting to me, just how approachable it was. And then, I mean, secondly, and probably the more important part is just how relevant it is to me. Like, I can finally relate to this.
It's really just like citizen science to a T. We had a giant group of people, and we made this fun. We gamified this quite a bit. There's incentives for people to do it that'll boost their game experience, but it's also just the heart and soul of our community as well. These are things that our people really enjoy, and this really is for the greater good. And that was the strength of this project in particular, where this came out when everybody in the world was at its height of being affected of this.
We're doing two things. Is one, we can, once we have this infrastructure in place, we can help the scientists by accelerating the ability to look at things they know are there. The other thing we can do is something they can't do, and that's look at all the possible things that are in the blood. And so what we can do is we can take even people who are not scientists and show them these data sets, and they can detect patterns they've done a wonderful job in the online game to explain the technology and explain the kinds of things we're looking for. And then we just let them loose on this data.
You hear about the COVID research or COVID going on all around the world. A lot of people, have had it or know someone who's had it. And just the fact that I can sit here at my desk while I'm waiting for a fleet, doing something that's going to contribute to, helping find out information about COVID-19, that's just phenomenal that I have this opportunity just playing a video game. And I think that's really kind of what got me into it, is that I can sit at my desk in the comfort of my home and I can help researchers do something, make a difference. And that's kind of cool.
During these 10 years, we managed to set up another project with Gearbox software. That was a completely different story. We took a good 4 or 5 years to actually launch it, and it's a DNA multiple sequence alignment minigame inside Borderlands. Now, if you know about Borderlands, that's a completely different game than EVE, so it's kind of an unlikely marriage. Whereas in EVE, you have a lot of time to do this almost meditative activity. It's something that you can hardly imagine how it would work in Borderlands. But Gearbox game designers made an amazing job. They created this arcade machine inside Sanctuary 3, where if you go inside, there is a small mini game, kind of like 8-bit retro style Tetris-y, Candy Crush-y minigame, and there you can actually manipulate DNA information that comes from the human microbiome. One of the things that Gearbox made, which was just pretty amazing, is that last year they decided that, hey guys, why don't we make a physical version of the arcade machine? So they created, I think, 10 or 15 of these arcade machines. The company in the US who manufactured it was the same company who created props for the Mandalorian series, so it's kind of a piece of art, and it was on exhibition recently at the Museum of Gestaltung in Zurich. Now, why it's also a milestone project is that this existed as a classical citizen science on the web called Philo, one of the most successful one. And what happened is that Gearbox game designers took the original project together with researchers, redesigned it, fit the aesthetics to the Borderlands universe, made some minor changes to make it much more fun and engaging, but we still have a very good comparison of how it works on a website and in a video game. The day we launched this minigame inside Borderlands 3, we collected 5 times more data than during the 10 years that researchers were running this project. So this is the kind of power that gamers can bring to science. And finally, I wanted to mention this. This is something that we announced last year in Reykjavik at FanFest. We continuously think about how to make this project more accessible to game developers such as yourself, and also to other researchers. Once we set up a project with a partner, it scales beautifully, as you see, but setting up new project takes a lot of time and it's really hard. So we're launching a new mobile platform which will act as a companion app to EVE Online and Borderlands Science. And with this, we'll gain a lot of freedom to integrate other projects and other research initiatives either on the mobile platform or the accompanying web portal. So this is coming out in 2024.
All right. So now, with this infrastructure in place, we can really start to kind of weave the core storyline of the game with product discovery. And like that has given us more confidence that we can lean more and more on it. And this gives us more tools to deepen the experience and blur the lines between the reality of EVE Online and the reality that we all live in right here. While changing the world and making it a bit of a better place. So, by doing this, we hope that we set an example for many other successful collaborations between science and gaming going forward. So, yeah, with that, I want to open the floor for questions if there are any. Or are you just hungry and want to get out?
Thank you very much. Yeah, we have a couple of questions in the audience.
Hello.
Hi.
Name's Eli. I'm a game designer, big fan of science and integrating it in things, but I don't have a AAA game behind me. I'm more of an indie developer. And I don't have a science fiction game yet, like more of a fantasy guy or like post-apocalypse where science gone wrong. And anyway, my question is, are there any use cases or any ideas you may recommend for first indie developers, like smaller scale games like mine, maybe even single players? We can assume that they are fairly populated by players, but still single, so no player interaction. And also non-sci-fi games where you cannot integrate it as well into the game's narrative. Thank you.
Yeah, so I actually think so I've had a lot of conversations with colleagues around this, and I think there are so many ways of skinning this cat. Oh, bad metaphor, but yeah, you get. But I think there's a lot of interesting things you can do with fantasy or post-apocalyptic. Absolutely, I think that's like, yeah. Oh, holy shit! That there's a lot of, like, once you open up actually restart. It was really like interesting when we started this project. Like the science community was way more skeptical about this than the gaming community. So there was a lot of scientists that looked at us like, no way. Like I'm not gonna like risk my prestige title and my prestige, you know, esteem kind of provenance, you know, mixing myself with games. So that was great to meet someone like Emma Lundberg, who was just kind of like, yeah, games, I love games, let's do it. And the first time we actually, so we started out getting a grant from the EU to look at this. And when the first results came out, and especially when the Nature article popped up, all of a sudden, like people that had been doubting us a lot started calling. And like there are so many scientific problems that need human eyes and kind of human intuition to solve. So even like we've seen kind of 4 different projects here today, but there are thousands of projects that need, like everywhere from just kind of, you know, categorizing animals to looking at, you know, radio wave signals to anything. So it's more about kind of finding, you know, understanding kind of your universe well, and then, or your kind of design space or creative space, and then kind of finding something that fits, and then just figuring out a clever way to weave things together. So Attila, do you have?
Yeah, what I would add is that originally we're aiming for partnerships with the AAA industry, simply because of the logic of citizen science. So how it works is that you have one image, you hand it out to 30, 50 different people, you make some sort of majority voting, and then that becomes the truth. So we need massive player communities, and of course, if we're talking about an indie studio who is now developing a game that might come out, might be successful, might not, eventually our goal is to save time for researchers. So we don't want them to commit and put a lot of energy to something which is at the end of the day might not work. Having said that, I think this new mobile platform will change this equation substantially. We'll have a lot of chance to work on different levels, and that also means the commitment from your side, because, you know, as an indie, you're pretty swamped to deliver and launch your title. It's not that you're looking for extra content or extra features in the game. Usually you cut those. And so on the mobile platform, we'll have a lot of possibilities to do collaborations where you can contribute with just art assets, let's say, just with game design, just some rewards to the community. We have the possibility to create like prototypes of scientific problems, like the multiple DNA sequence alignment minigame that then can be easily skinned, and that can use smaller communities and join those forces to solve these big challenges.
Yeah, and I think that's there's a huge unlock there when you get into this idea of maybe multiple games or multiple inputs like feeding into the same data set. That's super interesting, and that's kind of not exactly, but similar to what's happening in the Borderlands game, because I mean you have the online version as well. So there is a very beautiful opportunity where like multiple angles start to look at the same scientific problem, and then you can start to look at, hey, which version is actually working better? Yeah, super long answer to a question. Good question.
Hi, thank you for the talk. My name's Vlad. I'm lead optimization QA in Plarium. You mentioned that categorizing cells was automated since you started the project. I wanted to ask whether it was a byproduct of your data provided or byproduct of freeing the time of the researchers. Like, and maybe you can dip a bit into the automation of the thing.
Yeah. So when we set out to do the first project, one of the things that we wanted to make sure that was that, you know, if this wouldn't work, we could like rip it out quite quickly. So we made sure that Product Discovery was a fairly independent module within the game. Of course, you know, it gave you some rewards, but it was relatively independent. Initially, when we started, the whole automation was not a part of our goal, and it was more kind of a happy accident almost, or a found thing. the scientists had been battling for years with like trying to figure out algorithms to solve the categorization of proteins. And they had around, at the start of the project, I think we had around 21 different categories that the proteins could go into, and some of them could actually, some of the samples could do like, up to 4 categories. During the project, we actually found, the EVE players figured out that there was they added one more category that previously was thought to be an anomaly called rods and rings, and now is widely accepted as a proper category. Yay, science. So basically when we reached the first consensus of the data set, this started, people started kind of playing with this idea of feeding this into a learning algorithm. This was what, 2016, 15 or 16?
I think we launched it in 16.
Yeah, 2016. So
March.
Yeah. So this whole conversation about deep learning and things like that was very much kind of stuck in universities, hadn't really made it into kind of the general sphere. So by 2018, when this algorithm was established, it was pretty groundbreaking using it in science like this. Initially, what the scientists were most excited about, actually, side story, funny story. Initially, what the scientists were most excited about was they viewed this as a free opportunity to get UI and UX designers and game designers to make their tools better, because they had awful Windows 3.11 looking tools that would crash like every 15 minutes. So they viewed this as like, that they thought that was the biggest win in the history of science, to get like game designers and UI UX designers to like fix their internal tools. So when we rendered these tools obsolete, a couple of years later, they were like ecstatic. And now this, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Hi, Igor, UX UI designer. So I want to say that I'm pretty newbie to EVE Online, so that's why my question may be a little bit like silly, yeah. But in terms of the gameplay, what approach you define as like major? Is it a data-driven approach, or it's more like a story tale, like in percentage, for the game itself? And the second part of the question will be about those mini games. So are they mostly for joy and of the players, or it's a collaboration only?
So,
Thank you.
Good question. So for product discovery specifically, we found that there were kind of 3 types of players that kind of joined or participated in the project. The first group of players were players that were like, uber lore nerds that wanted to like, yes, we are like Citizens of EVE and we're figuring out the drifters. This was definitely the smallest cohort of players, but usually players that are very invested in the game and in the universe. And these players are incredibly important because they create a lot of kind of value outside the product. So they're usually quite active on social media and on the community. They write stories and kind of create that like secondary metaverse that lives outside your game, but kind of within the game itself, though. So those were kind of the smallest community of players that kind of felt excited about playing the game. The second group was people that had the altruistic need of like the greater good idea. Like, I'm playing this game because I'm solving something. I'm helping the world. I have a higher purpose kind of opportunity by playing this game. And we saw with those players, like, a lot of the feedback we got was like, finally I can tell my friends and family, I have a EVE Online story that they understand. It's really hard to grasp this idea that like, oh, I play this game, I'm a part of a corporation, and that corporation is a part of an alliance, and that alliance is like 20,000 people, and there's one guy at the top, and I'm like friends with him, and we're going to shoot this other guy, and it takes like 20 hours to blow up this keep star structure, and like, your mom has lost interest. Like, 10 minutes ago or 20 minutes ago. So actually being able to say like, yeah, no, I'm actually, curing COVID. Everyone understands it, it's super cool, and people are like, yeah, go, play more games. So that was kind of the second group. And then the most common and probably the most silent group of players were players that were doing it for just the content, just getting rewards. It's spending time just regular gameplay. So that's kind of the three groups of players that we saw participated in this. We try really hard to be a data-driven organization. Anyone in here that is probably also trying to be a data-driven organization, and it's fine, it's a lie. None of us are truly data-driven. I'll cover that tomorrow. Yes, we're a tiny bit data-driven, but yeah, we try to make educated guesses with qualitative and quantitative data, and we had to. There were a couple of moments in this project specifically where we had to react to changes. But yeah, that's qualitative and quantitative usually.
Just adding to that, talking about narrative, so one of the things that I found amazing how, although as Bergur mentioned, CCP tried to sort of keep project discovery as a separate thing inside the game, there were a lot of things where they connected it to the greater narrative of the EVE story. And one of the stories that I loved or was mind blown by it when EVE went free to play. I think it was in 2017-ish.
Yeah.
And so there was a narrative in the game for this change. I think it was one of the biggest changes of EVE Online. And so what they said is that because this citizen science project was successful, Sisters of EVE discovered a new technology called the alpha clones, who are the free-to-play players, and the subscription players became the omega clones. And that was just fascinating how the narrative connected to project discovery. The other thing, the other story is that we had a research project together with the University of Geneva. Psychologists made surveys and interviews with players. And what they found is that there was a significant change in behavioral patterns among players who participated in Project Discovery. And one of the patterns that they started to pick science-related skills from the skill tree in EVE Online, which is funny because, it's not really science, it just unlocks certain capabilities for your characters, but they still started to role-play as a scientist in the game, which was really interesting to see.
Yeah, and actually on top of that, Human Protein Atlas in Sweden, they saw a huge spike on their wiki, like where they had all their old articles that they have submitted, and they started their own Reddit around the first project, and EVE players were like asking really hard-hitting questions. They came to FanFest, and there was a panel where you would have EVE players raise their hand and really question something in a research paper that someone had written from Human Protein Atlas, and the answer from the scientists were like, wait, are you a biologist? And they were like, oh, no, I work in customs. And they were like, okay. So yeah, it was a great, awesome players.
Hello, thank you for the talk. I'm Jan from YOLO.games. I'll just mention that I'm 40 years old, gamer, and EVE Online is the only game that I had to, I didn't quit because I was bored, I quit because I wasn't bored. Way too much. This is very inspiring, and I would like to commend you guys on going into it. I wanted to ask two questions. So when you work with gaming companies, is there money involved, or is it more of a social responsibility kind of gathering? And the second question is about the design of how do the players know that they're how do the players learn that they're contributing to science, because you're moving the storyline, and everything, and it might get confused. I would assume that not all the players actually know that this is for science. So how do you work around that? Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, there is some money involved. Like these, we have to. MMOS needs to maintain servers that we pay like a monthly fee for it. It's not It's not terrible, but it's yeah, just to maintain servers and upkeep and make sure that the bridge is flowing and is not clogging up. There is definitely a social responsibility element within CCP, like when we talk about it and we think about it. We were talking about it just before we came on stage, that one of the bigger dilemmas of I think kind of running a gaming company is that, or like any HR person or CEO will tell you that the biggest question in the company survey is like, do you feel like my job has purpose? And this definitely gives, especially after 20 years, yes. Well, I've been with the company for 14, so whew. No, so I mean, this definitely gives you a sense of purpose. You're doing something bigger, something more meaningful. It's the work, the hours you put into the day of developing the world, this beautiful piece of art that EVE Online is, also has a kind of an added benefit to the greater good. So that there's definitely a kind of a humanitarian element there. The second half of the question.
How do the players know that they're contributing to something?
Yeah. So this was a huge debate at the beginning, because we don't want to break the immersion, but you have to let people know. Like it's important. We spent a lot of cycles debating it, how you would approach this, and I think only in the last project we explicitly said what, for what science you're kind of contributing to. So COVID-19. But what we found is that usually, like when we've announced the projects, this goes quite viral quite quickly within the community. So people know what's going on, and there is like, you don't necessarily open this thing without knowing what you're going into. And we do call out that this is citizen science, even if we're not saying explicitly what you're contributing to. But this again is kind of the contrast between us and the players. Like there is a trust that we're doing it for greater good, not yeah. And some people are almost not interested in the fact that you're doing citizen science, just the fact that it's fun, good content that you're doing.
So I wanted to comment on the funding part, is that this question comes up more often than not at conferences in different forms. People often ask me whether we are for-profit or non-profit. I often respond with that we are for loss, which is a very special company formation. But jokes aside, when I started this, I was pretty sure that this is not a project that's going to make me a billionaire, but I immediately felt that it's just too important to not to make it. So my goal with it is, and I'm still, struggling and trying to crack this problem, is to make this sustainable in the long term. I don't know about any other citizen science projects out there who were able to make it, in the sense that most of the citizen science projects, or almost all of them, are funded by grant money. We have that as well. So for example, we won a Horizon research grant from the EU, but I still believe that we'll be able to make it sustainable in the long term, and there's going to be a major win for citizen science.
But kind of going into this, we of course didn't really know what all the nooks and crannies, but it is somewhat of a superpower not to be associated with a specific research institute or a specific country or a specific organization. So one of the examples, for instance, was in the COVID research, because EVE players don't have any benefit in saying like this drug is better than that drug, or there is no benefit in that. So the result of the data from EVE players became quite valuable, because it was like people could be quite confident that it wasn't tinted by, if Pfizer does poorly, the German government, German finances go down and stuff like that. So it is an interesting superpower that we have, being kind of independent, and yeah, this was another kind of happy surprise by silly game nerds.
Hi, I'm Esther. Thank you for the talk. It was fascinating to listen to. I have a question to you, Attila, because I'm curious about the process. Because you mentioned that it's a long process to set up the process of matching a game and a research, because it was also said that first researchers were maybe worried about their prestige, and then there were a lot of projects that could use players, but then you also want to match the research project and the design of the game or the story of the game. So how does that work? Do you match the game to the project or the project to the game, or what's the process?
Are you by any chance Hungarian?
Igen.
Okay. Szépen. Ez mindig egy kellemes meglepetés. So sorry for that. That doesn't happen too often. I think one of the crucial parts that we managed to pull this off in the first place, which was not obvious at all, is that we were, as Bergur mentioned, sort of a neutral, independent entity. So we had the luxury not to push a certain agenda. So we didn't have a certain research question in mind or a certain research project that we have to work on or solve. But what we did is we started to build a portfolio of projects in the research world through our network of friends and researchers that we knew, whom we know that there are big data sets, that are people who are believe that citizen science can help their research, who are willing to work together with gaming companies in the long term and interact with the player communities. And so the idea was that we give the driver's seat to game designers because they know the game, they know their community the best. And so how it usually works is that after understanding how the game works, where might be possibilities to integrate, we propose a certain set of different research projects, and then it's the game designers who pick one, and then once we establish that, okay, this seems to be a good candidate for a next project, then we start an iterative process together with the researchers who make sure that, where as game designers sort of change and design a minigame, the scientific output remains relevant. One story about that is that we, for the second iteration, before we had the Exoplanet project, we proposed collaboration with the University of Ghent in the field of mass spectrometry. And we went so far as to, I think we even had some internal prototypes for the project. And then the design team sent an email that, sorry guys, this seems to be that it's just too easy for EVE players, and we don't want to devalue project discovery. Luckily, the researchers had an amazing spirit to it. They said that, Attila, don't worry. The important thing is not that our research project goes into this, but this whole initiative has to succeed. So yeah, that's how we approach this whole project.
Thank you.
I am extremely sorry, but we are out of time for the questions. Let's give a round of applause to our speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you.